Well, hello and welcome back to the all-new Channel 2012. Today I got something kind of interesting to show you all. The Hubsan X4 H107C 2-megapixel quadcopter flying machine. We'll be taking a closer look at that and covering everything you need to know in today's video. Full disclosure and a little bit of background before we get started, I could probably be considered a bit of a noob to flying machines as this is my first one. But after having spent a couple months using this and getting to know it, I've learned enough to put together a few observations and a quality review for you all here today. I picked up this particular unit on T-Mart originally over the summer for a little less than $70 and was fortunate enough that it was available from one of their United States warehouses, so I wouldn't have to wait half a year for it to come in. Unfortunately, the first unit I got worked, but the camera module did not. So I began the tedious process of attempting to return the original unit and getting a new one. Unfortunately, that process took a very long time to go through, not only to return this unit, but to get another one because they were out of these at their United States warehouse by the time I had processed the return. So from the time I placed the initial order to the time I received this working unit, a total of probably 2 months had passed. That's just the nature of the beast of ordering things from overseas. A side effect of which happens to be careless postmen who ruin the box of the product. Fortunately, the unit inside was not damaged. We'll just go ahead and take a quick peek at the stuff that's inside the box real quick. I'm not going to bore you with all the general unboxing video details. You all know the drill on how that works. Person takes stuff out of the box. As you can see, I've already unboxed it. This is what the packaging looks like. There's this protective layer on the top here. You also get paperwork. And if you order from T-Mart, underneath here you will find the propeller guard. The unit itself looks like this. It's quite nice. It's very small. It's only about as big as your hand. They're available in red and black, green and black, and also red and white, if I remember correctly. The H107C model comes with one very small 380 milliamp battery. I also ordered a second, slightly larger 500 milliamp battery, which is blue in color. Both batteries actually last for around the same length of time as far as flight goes. You'll probably get around 3.5 to 5 minutes out of either of these batteries. I'd say the difference in the amount of time that they last is really only a matter of seconds. That said, I found the blue one actually fits in the battery compartment in the unit better than the standard one and is easier to pull out. Other than that, the only main difference between them is that the standard 380 milliamp battery takes about 40 to 50 minutes to recharge with the supplied USB battery charger. There is no AC adapter included. The blue extended 500 milliamp battery takes closer to an hour or more to recharge, despite the similarity in flight time. In the box, they're nice enough to give you a bonus set of propellers, assuming that you may crash early on and damage the propellers. The propeller guard actually does a pretty good job of protecting those propellers, although as you can see, I've managed to unintentionally crash this a few times and still ding up the propellers that it came with. That said, it still flies pretty well. You also get a metal hook tool that will help in removing the propellers. Works like so. Each propeller is labeled A and B, and the armatures here, for lack of a better term, are also labeled A and B so that you know which ones go where. By default, on the green and black model, the green propellers go on the back and the black ones go on the front, but you can switch them around if you want, as long as you stick to the A and B designation. Lastly, most important, you do get a remote control unit, which is similar in size to a standard controller, maybe a little bit larger. You may hear me refer to this as a controller throughout the course of the video because it does have those telltale analog sticks and buttons on it. It's rather comfortable. It works fairly well. Very simple. It does require 4 AAA batteries, which are not included. If this is your first time with one of these units, it's important to understand that there are 2 types of remote control units that these are sold with. This particular one is a Mode 2, which means that the analog sticks and their functionality are switched. That is to say, the main throttle and turn left and right control is on the left side, and your forward, backward, left, right control is on the right side. I know there are correct technical terms for those functions, but these are the ones that I've found make the most sense. If the site you're buying from doesn't specify Mode 1 or Mode 2, assume it's a Mode 2 and get used to using this as your main throttle. It might seem like some backward, mixed up Nintendo 64 shooter nonsense at first, but in the long run you'll find it actually makes more sense than you would have thought. I know it certainly surprised me. I thought having those switched around like that would be confusing, but it's one of those things you get used to after some time. As I mentioned earlier, this is the H107C 2 megapixel upgraded model. Now, as far as Hubsan X4 micro quadcopter flying machines go, there's a few different models. On the low end, you have the plain old regular H107 and the H107L, which are very basic and don't have a camera at all in them. The H107C non-upgraded version is identical to this one in almost every way, except it has a lower resolution camera in it. And we'll cover the camera in more detail later. But all you need to know is that the base model is usually going to run around $20 less than the upgraded one. This cost me $70, a little less than $70 maybe, and the one with the lower resolution camera is less than $50 if I remember correctly. There's also one other H107 model, that's the H107D, and that one is identical to the H107C with the standard definition camera in it in every way, except that it has live feedback video, and its remote control has a screen in it that allows you to see the output of the unit's camera in real time. Unfortunately, that model is significantly more expensive and at this time is not available in a 2 megapixel model like this one is. Next, let's cover flight. Setting up the unit to fly is very straightforward. All you have to do is make sure that the charging light on the recharging unit has turned off, disconnect the battery, and plug it into the unit. As I showed you earlier, it just slides into the front here, and this plugs in to its mate like so. From here, the red lights in the back will stay on, the blue lights in the front will blink. Before we go any further here, let me just take a moment to explain a few things about the camera module, as these can sometimes have problems, as was the case with the first Hubsan X4 H107C that I had ordered. When you turn it on and look at the back here, you'll find that the camera module is pretty simple and straightforward. The micro SD card slot is right here. You'll stick the cards in upside down. Now before I do that, let me just point out a few things about the indicator light. All you really have to know about this is that a blinking blue indicator light means that there is no card inserted. You must insert the card with the power off. If you insert the card with the power on, it just won't work. When the unit first starts up, the pink light will come on for a little bit, and then it will turn off. A solid blue light means that the card is inserted and is ready to record video. To start recording, despite what the instructions say, you do not necessarily need to have the remote control unit synced up in order to begin. All you have to do is push the button on the side. Recording will be indicated by a blinking pink light inside. When you're done, you press the button again, and the blinking pink light will stop, indicating that the recording has completed and that it has saved your flight. It's very important that you remember to push the button to stop the recording before the conclusion of your flight. If you disconnect the power before you stop the recording, you risk losing everything that you recorded and corrupting your card. After you've got all that set up, you want to get out your remote control unit and turn it on. The green light and the beep indicates that it has paired with the unit. At this time, the blue lights in the front will also stop blinking. And from here you can proceed to fly. One thing that was a hard lesson learned for me is that there is a bit more of a learning curve to this if you've never flown a radio-controlled flying machine before. I'd say it actually probably takes a good week of fairly regular flight before you can master the basics. In all the other reviews they say, oh, it's so stable. And relative to other units, it probably is, but that doesn't mean you can just push up on the throttle and it'll hold itself perfectly in mid-air. There is, at all times, some user intervention required to keep it stable. Once you start flying and have flown it for a little while, you'll start to get used to the dynamics of how it responds to various control input. One of the most important things, if you're a novice, to know is that it is very important that you always, number one, can see the unit at all times, and two, know which way it's pointing, because that is crucial in your successful control of it. If it is pointing to the right relative to where you're standing, you have to turn the controls 90 degrees in your mind, and that's very, very difficult when you start out with, especially if you haven't used it very much. It's ultimately easiest if you keep it pointed with the back of it facing you and the front of it facing away from you, so that the controls will make the most sense and will be easiest to manipulate. The most important things to remember are to just take it easy at first and get used to the controls, and also to keep track of your flight time. And the reason that that is important is because the batteries on these go pretty quickly. 3-5 minutes of flight will go by in a very short amount of time. And if the unit is very far away from you when the batteries die, then you're kind of up a creek without a paddle. What these do when the batteries start to get low is all 4 of the lights will begin to blink. When you see that, you need to know that you have a very, very limited amount of time, maybe 30 seconds to a minute, to land the quadcopter. If you don't, the battery protection circuit will kick in and it will gradually land it for you. And by land, I just mean drop the throttle down over the course of maybe 15 or 20 seconds. And if this begins to happen while it is a great distance away from you, then you risk losing it, getting it stuck in a tree or a body of water or something. So what I've found to be helpful, because the unit does not convey battery information back to this controller, I have a stopwatch program on my phone, and I set it for around 3 minutes. And when the 3-minute timer vibrates, then I consider that it might be time to start bringing it back closer to Earth so that I can take it in for a smooth landing when the lights start to blink. As far as flight characteristics go, once you've mastered the basics, it's actually quite a pleasure to fly, and it is fairly smooth, stable, and responsive in the air. It does work indoors, but I found that it is actually most fun to fly outside just because there's more room and it isn't as restricted by walls and ceilings and furniture. In fact, the fact that things outside tend to be farther apart than they are inside means it's actually a little easier to fly, and it's a little more forgiving as far as controlling it a certain way when you meant to control it in a different way. Your greatest enemy, actually, when flying something like this outside is really only actually the wind. You need to have a pretty still day as far as wind is concerned to have a successful flight. The less windy it is, the higher and farther you can fly without risk of losing it. If it's a windy day and you fly it up too high, the wind may blow it out of your control before you can land it, and then you're totally screwed. So it's very important to take the weather elements into account and not to get too carried away with the freedom that is granted to you by the range of the remote control unit. And I guess while we're on that topic, we'll talk about the remote control unit a little bit. Your range for flight is fantastic. You're actually limited more by the size of the unit and losing sight of it in the sky than you are by the radio range, unless there's some kind of interference or something. But I haven't had any problems with that myself so far. You have to be careful, especially your first couple of times, that you don't fly it too high or too far away that you can't get it back. You'll want to practice landing it from, more medium heights first so that you know what the experience of dropping throttle is like and stuff like that. You have to remember that if you fly it too far away or over a body of water and you lose control, then that's the end of it. It's very, very important to always make sure that you know where it is and that you know which direction it's facing, as I mentioned before. Those are the two most important, most critical aspects of flight that you have to keep in mind if you're a noob and you're flying the Hubsan X4 Quadcopter flying machine. Now, if you are recording your flight, there's a few things to remember about that too. On the 2 megapixel upgraded version, I can't speak for the other one, but on this one, your flights will usually take up around 300 to 600 megabytes of space on your micro SD card. It equals out to a little over 100 megabytes per minute of flight. So depending on how many batteries you have, you could fill up a smaller 2 gigabyte card like the one I'm using here in one sitting. With that said, even despite, the limited amount of time that you have to fly because of the relatively small batteries and the small size of the camera, the video that it can capture looks fantastic, especially from high altitude, as long as you're careful not to lose it, of course. I've personally been able to capture some really cool aerial video from this when the weather cooperates. It's really quite fantastic. Even though the camera itself isn't that great, the view really is quite amazing. In case of an accident, the Hubsan X4 is small and quite durable. And that means even if you do crash, there's minimal risk of hurting somebody or breaking whatever it is that it crashed into. With that said, of course, it's probably not the best idea to intentionally crash it into another human being, but I can't tell you what to do. If you do crash, there are a few things to note. The first is that, as I discovered the hard way, the propeller guard can break. As you can see here, there is a fracture in this area and on this side as well. It still works, and I haven't ordered a replacement yet, so I keep it on there. But it's important to be careful that if it does break, that it could become warped in a way that the propellers may run into the sides of it. If you crash, there's a few basic things to watch out for, the first of which is these. And these are meant to break apart in case of an accident. If that happens, then you just push it back up and they just snap right back in. Also, if you have the propeller guard installed, it can tend to become unsnapped, so you just want to apply some pressure on each one and make sure they're all snapped in okay, and do the same with the propellers as well. Once you've done that and recharged your batteries, you're good to go again. In the unlikely event that you crash it so bad that stuff physically breaks, the Hubsan X4 is fortunate enough to be a hobby grade unit, and that means that there are replacement parts available. So if you break a motor or propellers or the propeller guard or the fuselage or the camera or anything else, you can get replacement parts for a reasonable price. The difference between a $50 Hubsan X4 and a $50 Walmart Flying Machine Special is that when you crash the Walmart Flying Machine Special, then you throw it away and buy a new one for $50. But when you crash the Hubsan X4 hobby grade quadcopter flying machine and you break a part, then you just buy a new part for a couple of dollars and install it and you're good to go again. And one of the other great things about these, if you're one of those people who is prone to losing remote control units, you can buy replacement remote control units for reasonably low prices. And they are multi-channel. I believe you can have up to 4 of them going simultaneously and independently of each other, which is pretty cool if more than one person is trying to fly a Hubsan X4 quadcopter at the same time. That said, the Hubsan X4 H107C is a great little machine, and I found it was a great immersion into the world of hobby-grade flying machines. I'll just go over a few pros and cons at this time to wrap up the review here. On the positive side, I was impressed that this is a fairly inexpensive unit. Like I said, this cost me a little less than $70, and I was able to get that blue battery too, so I can fly for more than 3 minutes before having to recharge. Like I said before, it's a great learning platform for learning how to fly a radio-controlled flying machine. The high-definition camera built in is great, and it's really cool. It adds a whole new dimension to be able to record your flights. And you can also get some really cool panoramic video from high altitude. The durability of the unit is pretty good. Even if you unintentionally crash the unit very violently, it can withstand those kind of noob mistakes. And if you do crash it so bad that you break something, replacement parts are available instead of rendering the unit ruined beyond prospect of economical repair. On the downside, there is a little bit of a learning curve, as there is with learning any new skill, and this is something that review videos don't normally talk about, but if you've never owned a flying machine before, know that that is a factor. I was also disappointed by the fact that while the remote control will tell you if its battery is low, there's no way to know that the quadcopter's battery is low without being able to actually see the blinking lights. And as I said before, if you don't have a stopwatch handy, that can be dangerous if you're flying it far and high enough away that you can't see the lights very well. Also, because the camera module is very simple in nature, it has no clock in it and no way to set the time, so your videos are going to have crazy, wacky, random recording dates on them, which can make organization of them difficult. With that said, it was a great first-time unit. I was very impressed, and I definitely recommend picking one up if possible. Although if you do choose to buy one yourself, I highly recommend finding one from a store that can ship out of the United States so that you don't have to wait a ridiculously long time for shipping. I hope you found today's video entertaining and informative, and be sure to stay tuned to the all-new Channel 2012 for the latest in video clips, reviews, guides, food, computers, general around the house, and other high-quality, high-definition uploads. Thanks for watching.